Hi everyone, thank you for joining us for our webinar today, Virtual Teams and the Critical Factor of Communication. My name is Kat Duco and I'm the Marketing and Business Development Manager at the Myers-Briggs Company. I work alongside a team of key account managers to support our customers across the Asia Pacific region. I'll be assisting with questions and comments throughout the webinar, and we'll keep participants on mute to avoid any background noise, but we do encourage participation throughout by using the questions box feature on your GoToWebinar panel. Today's webinar will run for about an hour and will be facilitated by Dr. Martin Bolt, Senior Director of Professional Services and Psychologist at the Myers-Briggs Company. Martin has extensive experience working with organizations across the Asia Pacific region in areas of team effectiveness and executive leadership development, organizational change, virtual training solutions, workplace well-being and resilience, and he is also our lead assessment certification trainer. Today, Martin will be sharing insights, research, and different approaches for enhancing communication in your virtual teams. And with that, I will turn you over to Martin.
Thanks, Kat, and welcome to everyone who's joined our webinar today. And as Kat mentioned, because it's a live webinar, we have the opportunity to keep it participative or interactive. So we will be inviting you to share through chat responses your thoughts or questions, or indeed your own experiences of some of the items that we cover off today. I wanted to start with our company's mission, the Myers-Briggs company's mission, which is to inspire everyone to lead more successful and fulfilling lives. And I think that fits really nicely with what we're spending our time on today on the webinar, because ultimately what I'm hoping we're offering and what we can walk away with is to help everyone feel more engaged with what they're doing, particularly in a virtual environment, to feel more engaged and productive with the teams that we're part of, and also to keep in mind the things that are going to help us with our own well-being, because these are essential things for, especially now at this point in time where more of us are working virtually and online. And in looking at preparing for our webinar today, I had to really reflect on my experience of virtual teams and virtual working, and what I kind of overlooked is that I've been being part of virtual teams in one shape or another for more than 15 years. And of course, the emphasis of working virtually has increased in more recent times. But what I'm sharing today is partly based on my experiences, based on research about what we know works for communication in virtual teams and what can be challenges to that, and also from our experience of working with our client organizations where we provide consulting support, particularly around leadership and team development. And another thing to maybe highlight as it links to our mission is that the Myers-Briggs company is part of the B Corp movement. The B Corp movement is about organizations putting a focus on the environment, the people who work in the organization, and the wider community. And although it might be a fairly new concept, some of you may not have ever come across the B corporations before, it's gaining huge momentum as a movement for organizations to focus in on these broader outcomes and the impact of the organization, particularly as people are looking for places to work that align more with their values. And it's one of the reasons why we experience working with virtual teams, is because as a global organization, we're having to find ways that connect the people that work with us, our customers, and suppliers, and in the environment. As we go through, I'll be mentioning that the way we work with supporting teams, and indeed our own teams, is to help build greater awareness of how people prefer to interact and communicate. And there are a number of different assessments that our organization both develops, researches, and distributes that can help give some very objective and very insightful understanding of our own needs with respect to communication, as well as the needs of our team members. So you can see on the screen there, we've got a summary of the different assessment models, and we found that these can be particularly powerful if it's the right assessment used at the right time to help improve communication, and even more so in a virtual world. So the virtual world is everywhere and it's anywhere, and it's a reality that's in front of us now and that we're all experiencing. In fact, just by being part of this webinar today, you're part of that virtual experience. And so what I wanted to maybe start with is a more, I guess, routine or mundane experience of putting together a to-do list. And what you see on screen here is a list of tasks in my to-do list that in previous years I might have noted down on yellow post-it notes or sticky notes and posted them around my room or in my book to remind me of the things to do. But more and more these days, my to-do list sits on my laptop. And not only does it sit on my laptop, but many of the activities that I need to complete on that to-do list are things that I can do from my laptop. So we are clearly living through a sort of a virtual revolution where more and more things are going online, not just our thinking, but also our actions. And I'm sure in the recent times, in the last few days and the last few weeks, more of that virtual experience has increased, particularly around expectations for people to keep social distance, to manage the health challenges that we and the globe is actually facing. So that's actually then having an impact on where people are working, the space and place of work, and how we are experiencing it as a new virtual reality. And in preparing for our webinar today, I did a little bit of research, particularly around the Australian workplace. And this statistic came through, it's quite fascinating, that more than 30% of Australian workers spend at least some of their time working remotely. Now there's 30%. And I would like you to consider, when was that research done? Now the answer to when was that research done, it was back in 2016 by the Australian Bureau of Statistics. So going on 4 years ago, and of course we're now encountering a very different environment, probably a completely different outcome in terms of the percentage of people working remotely today. But this is just to highlight that this is something that has been rapidly increasing over time, and there is a growing change with respect to where people are working and how they're working. One example that stands out is Cisco, who in 2019 offered at least 80% of their employees to work from anywhere as a flex option. Now, having put that in as an option and having more of their workforce working remotely, what they identified is that's resulted in over $490 million of cost savings, particularly with respect to facilities and real estate savings. But that wasn't the only outcome that they found, that there was also an increase in the satisfaction of their employees, and also as it relates to how they work with each other. Now, in our more recent times, as of last week, Australian-based organisations such as Clayton Utz or Vodafone have actually closed their physical work offices as precautionary measures to deal with the COVID-19 health pandemic. And some, again, recent research found that when given the choice, 78% of Australians expressed a desire to spend at least a certain amount of their time working from home. Now that figure was captured last year, of course, and things have somewhat moved on in terms of expectation versus reality. And while it might seem like it's a very sudden thing, there has been a gradual revolution towards working more in virtual ways. So even organisations who right up until a few weeks ago might have considered themselves not ready to embrace remote work, there is been a constant movement in the direction of doing things more virtually in the workplace. Interestingly, meeting in the same physical space as a form of meeting with work teams or colleagues has been declining, even for teams that are co-located. So you can see there on the graph, face-to-face meetings has been decreasing, whereas if you look at the use of online collaboration platforms, that has been increasing. And I dare say many of those platforms now are being relied on heavily in many parts of the world. And as someone mentioned to me the other day, we're experiencing a Zoom boom. So the changing space and place of work is really happening and has outcomes at 3 different levels. The first is for the individual employee. And what virtual work and remote work is resulting in is increased flexibility that any one of us could have now about where we work. It wasn't that long ago that people would make most of their decisions about who they might work for or the kind of company based on the physical distance that work office or work location was from their own home. So in a more remote work environment, physical distance is of less of a priority, and then it therefore means that people can choose a wider range of jobs. For organisations, there's increased use and reliance on remote workers. So where they might have only been able to previously tap into a workforce that was physically located nearby, they now have access to or can join up people working in different parts of the world through remote work. And at a global level, the global move towards virtual work conditions and collaborations has increased, such that you can have people who are considered their immediate team members, but may not necessarily even work on site in the same location or, for that matter, the same country. So putting all this together, it's forming into a new normal with respect to a new normal way of working with each other. And as I said, it feels like it's a bit of a revolution, but it's been quite gradual up until very recently. And it goes without saying that we're now, more and more of us are now rapidly experiencing a huge change and shift in how we're all expected to work with each other, so that the experience of COVID-19 and the social distancing measures that we're now being asked to undertake has further increased virtual work as the new normal. Now, dealing with the unexpected outcomes from COVID-19, we're starting to see that people who might have not previously had a strong need to work virtually or had thought about it but never acted on it, rapidly being expected or have that as one of their only choices of continuing to work. So the current situation has resulted in very sudden change for organisations and for people. And for many of us, the new place of work has changed just within a matter of days. And in fact, that is the case for even our business. So we don't know how this will turn out or what's going to change as a result of us all having to work in this very new normal way. But there's no doubt that this experience of working more virtually to deal with COVID-19 is going to shift and change expectations. So the changing space and place of work has a number of effects to it. For many of us, where we were previously working physically co-located, working with people in person, that's changed within the last month. And now we're expected to work virtually, not in the same physical location, and expected to interact with our teams and our colleagues in very different ways. So here was a moment where we're going to invite you to share your thoughts or responses to this. And I'll ask everyone to just take a moment to reflect on and then share your answers in the chat function. How are you experiencing the new normal personally, this new normal of working virtually? How has the space and place of work changed for you as a result of this new normal? So I'll just give a moment there for people to put their answers in, and then Kat, if you've got some points that have come up that you could share with us?
One person has said not much change as they coach by phone and Zoom anyway, but on-site meetings and workshops have stopped with leadership teams. Others have said not fun, missing normal interactions, less face-to-face meetings, difficult to get inspired. Now there's partners and kids in the background, longer working hours at home, quite a few things coming through.
Yeah. So firstly, thanks for people sharing, because I think what that's really saying to me is we are in this together in terms of those occurrences. And I think to take the point, some people working in a very virtual way or remote way is not a new thing for them, because they were either previously doing that and had set up for it. But then we can clearly see there is a huge percentage of people, much greater than probably what was happening in 2016, who are now just expected to work virtually. And so the experiences can be quite different. But even for those who were previously set up to work virtually or in virtual teams, I think it was acknowledged there that interactions with clients or how we might deliver our work, if it's in a training format, has now moved completely into a virtual domain. And then on the home front, I think that's an experience for those who've moved their place of work to being at home, which is where we're all expected to be for the most extent. That's going to come with its own new both challenges and frustrations, and having family part of our workspace and they being in our workspace is going to also present some new experiences and challenges that go with that. And I'm reflecting on even just in the last week of working from home with my family around me, and my wife and I actually working in the same work area, and I can hear and see how she goes about her work, and she can hear and see how I go about my work. Whereas previously we would be working in very different locations, and so we're getting a clearer sense of what it's like, what we both do each day in work. And indeed, my children are seeing more of what we get up to in our work lives. And I've also been watching as my children have started to transition into online school classes and what it's like to see them learning in an online environment. So there's lots of things that have changed as a result of it. But I think what's been shared there in your responses is there is a very human side to this virtual work that we're all encountering. And there are some real challenges and real frustrations and costs that come with it. Some of us have moved to working virtually in a very gradual way, and so some of these challenges may not be as present. But for those who've just switched to virtual working, it can lead to some very real emotional challenges and experiences. And this is therefore then creating real disruptions and challenges, not just for ourselves, but I'm sure the people that we work with as well. So if we're not careful about being attentive or sensitive to these real human challenges, what can inadvertently happen is teams might experience increased stress, and when there is increased stress, there is less communication. So it's normal for people to fill in the blanks if there is less communication or interaction going on with their colleagues. And we know that when people fill in the blanks, they come to assumptions that might be inaccurate or not well formed, and then that can quickly lead to misunderstandings. So that will directly impact how effectively teams and team members can work with each other. So I'm pointing this out because there is a real human side to the changes that we're experiencing. Everything from feeling disoriented and stressed right through to being out of our routines, which can then impact on our well-being. And I guess if you're a people leader, it really reinforces the need that you need to be attentive to your team's experience of that change and the human experience that they are encountering. So if more and more of us are now experiencing virtual work and virtual teams, how do we successfully navigate team communication? And that's going to be different depending on our experience of the change that we've encountered. For some of us, working as a part of a virtual team was planned and intentional. For others, it might feel imposed or very sudden or out of our control. What we do know from our work with helping teams develop to high levels of performance, as well as the research around teams, is regardless of whether you're a team that works in person or virtually, there are 3 foundation blocks that need to be established, and time needs to be spent by the team looking at and working on these issues. And we've listed them here on the screen. So the first thing is the mission of the team. What is the purpose of the team? Is it shared by the members of the team? How is the team tracking towards achieving its mission and purpose? And how connected do people even feel towards that mission? If people don't feel connected to the purpose and mission of the team, you'll most likely get them turning up, being present, but not actively contributing. There needs to be real time spent on how team roles are defined, how tasks will be distributed, and also who's got capacity within the team to take on different responsibilities. And those responsibilities and bandwidth or capacity to take things on or not will have most likely changed as teams have turned more into virtual operations. And thirdly, organisational support. So employees need to know that they not only have the physical resources, such as the technology or the workspace, but they need to know the processes that are there to support them working virtually, and also to know that they've got support from their manager or team leader and the people that they're working with. Now, regardless of whether your team is in person or virtual, if these 3 areas are not addressed or dealt with by the team, they end up being derailers or blockers to the team working effectively with each other. So what can organisations and leaders do to ensure that these don't become blockers? So there are 3 key things we're sharing with you here that, and I'll ask you to consider how is your team going with these 3 things, but 3 things that you really need to have in place to ensure that your team can operate successfully in a virtual environment. And the first is, does your team have all the technical skills and knowledge and tools in order to operate virtually? And we have been seeing in just days how teams have rapidly adopted new online platforms for information sharing, for meetings. Do people know how to use them? Are their systems set up? And what are some of the predictable frustrations that are going to occur? Everything from internet connectivity right down to, do webcams work or not work? So making sure people have what they need in order to work with the technology is essential. Secondly, the leaders of the team. Appointing a capable leader is not simply appointing someone who's effective at leading teams when they're in person. It's the leader who models the kind of communication, the tone and the pace that the team are going to use with each other. And if a leader has never led their team virtually before, don't assume that they have the skills and experience to lead them virtually. So this is where, if your organisation hasn't already done so, it needs to check in with their leaders to establish, are they capable and feeling equipped and prepared, or do they have the skills to lead their teams virtually? And that can be a real mindset shift for many leaders. If they don't have the skills, the organisation needs to invest in equipping the leaders with those skills. And this is where we will often start a lot of our team development work, helping the leaders initially, because they have a huge influence over the success of the team working virtually. And thirdly, how effectively does the organisation enable the virtual teams to maintain connection with the workforce, not just on the work side, but the social side of their lives? So here's something, I guess, for you to, so you're not just hearing the information, but apply it to yourself so that it becomes something that's a real experience for yourselves. So consider for yourselves privately how your organisation is doing with these 3 essential responsibilities. And if there is an area that they're not fulfilling or meeting it to expectation, what plans are in place to get there? Taking into consideration that this is all quite new for many organisations about having so many people working virtually. So now I'm moving to some foundational building blocks around what's essential for teams to work effectively and collegially and cohesively with each other, and how to minimize things that might block team productivity or derail teams from what they need to be doing. So this chart really simplifies a lot more complexity than what it initially illustrates, but teams have to have trust. Members of teams have to trust each other, and if they don't, it goes to impact on how effectively they're going to work and collaborate. As I was just mentioning, there needs to be tools and technology that supports teams working with each other virtually. The team members need to feel engaged in what they're doing. And if they aren't engaged, or because of working virtually they feel disengaged, that's going to directly impact on productivity and contributions in the team. But today's session, we're going to hone in on communication. And communication is really what people are at most risk of not doing well in a virtual experience. So today's session, it's really to spend most of our time looking at what's crucial to supporting high quality communication in a team. There's a risk that as we move into an online and virtual way of working with each other, that there's lots of communication, but it's not necessarily high quality. And also considering the personal and organizational strategies that can impact on the effectiveness of virtual teams, or how we can improve working with each other virtually. So this is where we'd like to get some feedback and responses from yourself through a poll. In a few moments, Kat's going to launch a poll online, and you'll have a chance to respond online. But what we're looking at here is the question, what would you say that your virtual team or teams, or would you say your virtual team or teams are communicating effectively? So I might ask Kat if you could launch the poll. And when we've given it a few minutes for people just to respond, we can move to looking at their answers. But there's the question, would you say that your virtual team or teams are communicating effectively? And you can choose doing well, needs improvement, or in progress. So I'll just pause there to allow people to respond to that.
We are getting responses coming through.
Excellent. So again, just give a moment.
Like we're at 75% of people have voted so far. So we'll give it a couple more seconds.
Okay, thanks.
Also, a comment's come through while the rest of everyone votes, saying that we are doing daily check-ins as well as regular meetings and setting up smaller work groups to help people stay closely connected. That's
great that someone shared that, because that's almost speaking to some of the points that we're going to explore of how do you build that sense of common purpose and team alignment. And so daily is really crucial, particularly in an environment where people might be working virtually for the first time. So that's great that someone shared that. So Kat, how are our results on the poll looking in terms of this question?
Good. I'll go ahead and share what we've got. I closed the poll off. So we had most people vote, but you can see on the screen, it should be showing that about half of everyone has said that they are communicating well. And Excellent. Then the other half is in the lower part, so needing improvement, or maybe they need some help.
Great. All right, so thank you again for sharing. And and I think what jumps out for me is it's a 50-50 proposition. About 50% of people see it working well for them, and 50% of people more or less experiencing that need to improve or it's not working at all. So I guess the question we should ask ourselves is, can we afford to have half of the teams working productively, especially in our current environment where we're trying to make sure that we can keep things operating and going at the best level possible. So here's where I wanted to start to really map out from our experience and from years of working virtually. And again, when I consider I've worked as part of virtual teams in our global organization for more than 15 years, but also working as a consultant to support virtual teams, here are 3 areas or 3 elements that we see as essential for effective communication in teams. And I'll be going through each one of these 3 with some tips and strategies. And as we go through them, I'll ask you to think about, how does this relate to your own experience of working virtually, or what are some of the things that you might need to look at or adjust to address these 3 areas. So the first one is setting norms and expectations and predictability within the team. So this becomes really important, and it centers very much around the question, what am I to be doing right now in my team? So what's my focus in my team? So especially in times of sudden change or sudden movement into a virtual way of working with each other, team members can start to be asking themselves questions that relate to, what do I focus on? And it's a bit like the experience that I liken it to, if you've taken 2 or 3 weeks off leave for a holiday or a vacation, and you return to work after those couple of weeks away from work, and you've sort of left work behind for 2 weeks, what it feels like to be there on the first day after your vacation. And there can be that real sense of, I need to feel like I need to catch up with what's been going on. I need to get a sense of what am I to be doing? What is my team working on? And it can be almost quite disorienting, or a sense of feeling that we're not connected and knowing where to focus our attention until we get that kind of update. So in setting norms and expectations, historically, we've done this by bringing people together physically. So normally in an on-site workplace, there is a lot of physical structure present in the environment that helps with that setting of norms and expectations. First of all, in the physical workplace, there are meeting spaces where people can actually come together and structure their time and their work together. There are workstations or cubicles where you can actually go and walk up to a colleague and ask them questions directly. And we don't have a lot of the outside of the workplace interruptions or other things that are going on in our life physically present in the workplace. For many people, they're not bringing their kids and pets to work, nor are they dealing with questions about what's going on in another part of the household when we're physically in the workplace. In contrast, when people are working in a virtual environment, and certainly at this point in time, for most of us, if not nearly all of us, it's at home, it's up to employees to build and apply a structure and focus. Again, some of you may have been doing this for a period of time or even many years of working independently and remotely, and it may not be a new thing to you. But that leaves for us many people, and I guess using our poll as an example, 50% of people out there at least who might feel like they haven't got a clear understanding of the norms and structure that people are expected to work to. So that can lead to uncertainty, loss of productivity, and ultimately engagement. So when we're setting norms and what are we trying to achieve here and what are the benefits, here are the things that we see that is important for teams. First of all, there needs to be parameters. We need to have parameters about how we're going to work with each other and what we're going to be working on. And that guides the continuity of communication, how often, how frequent, and what we're going to focus on in our communication. Norms also give structure around how we're going to collaborate, when we're going to collaborate, what issues and decisions do we need to come together, discuss and explore. Also inviting people to share what they're working on. So getting an understanding of what are each of our team mates or team colleagues focusing on helps us understand how that supports the productivity of the team and also how fast we need to move through things. And by having norms and expectations, we're reducing the likelihood that people are uncertain about what they need to focus on. We reduce the common misunderstandings or angst and frustration that might emerge when people say, so what am I doing today? Because I have no idea. And it also goes to helping build trust between members of the team. So norms and expectations serve an important part in establishing how people are going to work with each other. So what are some tips for helping set norms and expectations and predictability? And again, you may have actually done some of this, you may be doing some of this, or some of this may be new to you. So as I go through the tips, maybe reflect on what does this mean for your own team and how you work with them virtually. So moving online or towards more virtual work requires rethinking the kind of norms that teams need to set up and establish. So teams need to actually become very clear about when are we meeting? Are there designated points in the day, points in the week that we're going to be meeting? What issues do we need to get together virtually to discuss or explore? And what tools are we going to use to help us communicate that? For example, if I have a 5-page document that I want to share, do I want to be sharing that just simply through a text? It's not going to be appropriate. Or if there is spreadsheets that need to be explored, do I want to be doing that just simply through email? So it's really thinking about what's the technology that's going to help us work effectively in a virtual way, and also what are the norms about that, and to be clear about it with each other. Then we have expectations. So how are we going to encourage and support employees to manage their time working virtually in such a way that it doesn't impact on their well-being, or worse still, results in burnout from overwork because their workspace is now more located in their home. And in actual fact, there's a lot of research to show that virtual workers have a high risk of paying less attention to their well-being because their work desk or their work spot is now within their home environment, where they previously would have had that separation that enabled them to keep that well-being, or a place for that well-being, and not to do 13 and 14 and 15-hour days. So we need to be really clear about when are we going to be online, when are we organising meetings, particularly if people work in different time zones. How does that impact on things like how much sleep they get, or when they're expected to be conscious and really contributing at their best in the day. Also expectations around what do we need to be interdependent on in our work with each other, and what are the things that we can work independently on. And what skills do people need to be members of the team? What kind of team skills do they need around communication or decision making that's going to help them work effectively in a virtual way? And then there's the predictability piece. And this is where team members need to be clear, particularly from the leader's perspective, about what is going on in the organization, especially if they are now working more remotely or away from the office. There is less cues and less informal updates occurring when people are working virtually. So the responsibility to be predicting when information is going to be shared, or to know when information is going to be shared, and having an understanding of that becomes even more crucial. So this is where managers really need to set some standards around when they will be sharing or communicating with teams, and when they're expecting teams to be present and sharing and communicating. And for managers, there can be a temptation in a virtual environment to simply just communicate by sending messages out, but not necessarily at a time of day that will be effective for the team. if, for example, you're a manager or a team leader who naturally does a lot of their work and responding to emails or messages in the evening, say after 8 or 9 p.m., think about the impact of sending out a response to an email at 8 or 9 p.m. to one of your team members. And if they happen to be reading that message, it might create the expectation they have to respond then and there in their evening, which goes back to setting expectations. So be clear about when you're wanting teams to be ready to share and communicate with each other, and when there are times that you're quarantining for people to have for their own time and space. So what I'll ask everyone to do now is just reflect on your own experience here of your team and how well it's doing in terms of setting norms and expectations. How effectively has your team come together in its virtual way of working and gained agreement and clarity around norms, expectations, and predictability? So just give everyone a few minutes to reflect on that. And if you have a comment or a thought to share, feel free to put that in the chat function. And Kat, if anything comes up, please feel free to add that into our discussion.
Yeah, so a few things have come through around trying to do daily check-ins or getting some common technology platforms in use in the company. There was a question that came through as well that was, there's actually a few questions, but I'll focus on one for the moment. One that was saying, is it okay if we're not perfect at remote communication at first, or are we causing damage to the team that we'll need to repair later?
Yeah, I can hear how that's a great question in terms of reminding ourselves, and it goes back to norms and expectations, how much patience and tolerance we have for ourselves and for our teammates, particularly as we might find ourselves working in a completely new way of working with our team in that virtual setting. So I think the first thing is, I treat it like if we're all doing something new for the first time or for a new period of time, it's no different to learning a new skill like riding a bike. There's going to be times we'll fall off, but what do we learn from that fall or that challenge, and what will we do differently the next time? So especially for teams who are new to working virtually with each other, really give yourselves and set that expectation that we're not going to get it right the first time. We're going, and this is my experience of doing the same thing with our teams, is there are some things that are not going to work well the first time. It might be technology, it might be how people are sharing or operating in a discussion online. So giving that space and acknowledging that we can improve from where we are now. I think it's unrealistic to say people's communication will be at the same quality and standard it was in in-person meetings and assume it's just going to carry over into virtual. So I think that's a great one to keep in mind around what are the expectations that we have for each other when things don't work. We'll keep moving ahead, but thank you for sharing those thoughts and responses to that element. Moving to the next key part of effective team communication in a virtual environment has to do with how we go about mediating distance and maintaining connection. So really, effective communication is more than what is considered transactional interactions or transactional communication. An example of transactional communication might be we have information or a message we want to share with a team member and we would like their response, and we send the email to them and then we expect them to respond to us. Now that kind of transactional communication, it happens all the time and it's part of the world of work. It gets work done, but it doesn't foster collaboration nor trust with our team members. And many managers come to us to ask us to help their team build greater trust and build more collaboration. And when we ask them, well, how do you go about working with each other? We often find most of their communication is transactional and not serving the purpose of helping form quality relationships. So this becomes an even greater level of importance for teams when they're working virtually, because there's a greater risk that a lot of communication defaults to transactional communication. So here's where we need to help teams build the kind of communication and conversations with each other that results in a shared context, common ground of what the team members are experiencing. And the shared context then results in supporting relationships within the team. Now, in virtual work environments, teams become susceptible to a concept we're describing as virtual distance. And by virtual distance, it can make it harder, excuse me, for teams to create and maintain that shared context that we might otherwise build when we're working in person with each other. So what are we talking about when we mean by virtual distance? There can be an assumption that virtual distance only occurs because of having a physical separation, be it a geographic location or a time zone between members of a team. But that's actually not the case. Virtual distance occurs when we have three elements of distance, one of which is physical distance. So we are physically located in a different place to our teammates. A second outcome that contributes to virtual distance is operational distance. So how we go about getting things done. Do I actually spend time updating my team on what I'm working on, or do they update me, or am I going off in my own silo and working on that area without thinking about how that connects to the broader team? And the third piece that contributes to virtual distance is called affinity distance. This is the degree of relational and human connection we feel or don't feel with the people that we're working. And really, this is the human connection part of working in a team. So it is possible to be located physically in the same office environment as your team and still experience virtual distance, particularly if you have the affinity distance as part of it. So why do we need to pay attention to virtual distance? Well, this has come from a paper published in the Harvard Business Review, The Effects of Virtual Distance on Teams and what kind of outcomes occur. And you can see on the screen there's some pretty significant impacts on how teams and businesses would operate if they're experiencing virtual distance. There's a reduction in the level of innovation shown, and a 90% reduction. Trust is significantly impacted between team members. Cooperation goes down. There is less clarity about what people are working on. The success of projects that teams are dedicated to working on decreases, and then also commitment to the organization and things like discretionary effort start to drop away. So a question here really is, can we afford any of this to be happening in the teams that we're part of, particularly the virtual teams that we're part of? And how do we go about then mediating that experience of distance, or reducing the sense of virtual distance that people might be currently experiencing, or that might creep in as we work for a longer period of time virtually? Well, here are some things that we think know work, and also we think are really crucial, especially at this point in time. And for mediating distance, we want to keep in mind it isn't just about providing technology. So simply giving people online meeting platforms or ways they can exchange information is not going to reduce virtual distance. There's an assumption that open physical workspaces will naturally result in powerful and productive collaboration, and we also know that's not the case. Collaboration, as I mentioned earlier, requires shared context and shared bonds between the members of the team. So connection comes from being transparent with the people that we work with in our team and building that shared context. So if you haven't spent time with your team saying, what is it that we are all commonly experiencing? What are we faced with? That's the place to start to build the shared context, and simply asking what is it like for everyone to now be working in this new environment is a way of starting to build that shared context. To reduce virtual distance, A key thing here is we need to spend more time building social connections with the team members, and that's not just amount of time, but depth. So asking your team members as part of your virtual catch-ups, what is it that they are working on to showcase their contributions to the team? How does that play a part in adding to what the organisation or the wider business is contributing to? That helps build a sense of community around what people are joined up around in the team. Another important element here is humanizing the people that are in our team. And a fascinating study done by Kellogg School of Management, where they got people who were actually teammates and got them to work on a joint project, but the only way they could interact and correspond with each other was via email. Now, what they did was observed what was the effect of working with each other that way, and what was an outcome was the solutions that teams came up with, more of them were ineffective than effective. There was an increasing number of team members blaming each other for not taking their part in contributing to the work and the outcomes. And also there was low levels of trust that people reported with their team members. Now, they did a switch on the exercise, and before they started assigning the project, they asked team members to share a photo with all of their team, their own photo and images of each other, to really put a human face to who was in their team. And at the start of all their interactions, they spent the first 10 minutes getting to know each other before they started the project. So we see that this humanizing is crucial, because the outcome of teams who did the exercise under those conditions was that the project success increased compared to those that hadn't had that human experience. Time to completion on the project reduced, there was less errors made by the team, and there was less blame directed at the team members. So where we see this as crucial is in the work we do with our clients, particularly client organizations, where they're trying to address teams that have people with the essential technical skills and knowledge, but they don't have the human element to it. And the way we work with organizations on that is to help create that environment where trust can be built and connection can be built, initially by helping people learn about their own needs, be they personality preference needs or interpersonal needs, but then also to learn about the personality and interpersonal need preferences of their teammates. And there are a number of different well-researched methods for doing that, using assessments such as the Myers-Briggs type indicator, or another instrument around interpersonal needs, the FIRO-B. Using those as models, it fast tracks the learning about who are the people I'm working with and humanizes them. And so that increased awareness of our own needs and the needs of others can help build appreciation of differences. There are, of course, some people or some circumstances where teams are faced with what I would call special circumstances that's going to require an increased effort on looking at the quality of communication they have with each other. So we've described them there in the list, and if your team is newly formed, they're going to spend more work, need to spend more time and more effort building that human connection and the quality communication with each other. Or if your team is going through a high degree of uncertainty or disruption, they're going to need it. If there's significant change going through your organization, be it structure or responsibilities or products, there's going to be a need to increase that human and shared context experience. If teams are working more remotely or virtually than they have previously, and also if organizations are experiencing barriers such as slow completion of tasks or poor collaboration decision making, these are situations where even more time needs to be spent on the communication piece. And just to talk about teams with high levels of diversity, it's possible to have teams that is made up of people of many different backgrounds, both culturally or ethnically, or even from a technical and professional background. But simply bringing together people of diverse skills doesn't equate to a high performance team. And in actual fact, we find that building awareness of that diversity and how to leverage that diversity is crucial in diverse teams realizing their potential of being effective. And another element of diversity is diversity of thinking and personality. That can often get overlooked, which is why we see it really important for teams to spend extra time on the communication when that diversity is there. So when we're talking about communication within the team, again, to try and map it out in a simplified way, if we look at the kind of communication that teams need to engage in and regularly do, on the left half of this chart, we have work-based communication. And work-based communication is the formal team communications of tasks, activities, and what's being done. And that needs to happen because that gets work done. But that kind of communication doesn't build trust and support within the team. So it's really the kind of communication on the right-hand side, the relationship-based communication, that's needed to build shared context and trust with teams. And this is where, if your team is not already doing this, allowing people to not just talk about the work-based element, but checking in with them about what's going on for them in their lives. How is their family coping with changes that they might be experiencing with remote working? What changes have they made personally to deal with the situation they're in? And there needs to be authentic conversations. These are not the kind of conversations where you're saying, what did you have for lunch? Because that doesn't go any way to really establishing that genuine interest and humanizing of the relationships in our team. Also giving teams time that if they haven't done a lot of that relationship-based conversation previously, or authentic conversations, it's going to take time to feel comfortable with that. And a brief example of how we might build some of that into our own team meetings here in our organization is at the beginning of each session, our team meeting, we invite people to share what's going well or what went well for them in their lives since we last met. It sounds like a very benign question, but it can help build that authentic communication with within the teams. So here again, I'll ask you to reflect on how is your team going with the mediating distance and maintaining connection? How well do you think your team's going? Does it need improvement, or is it in progress? And what might be some of the things you're doing that's in progress? And again, Kat, if there are any shared thoughts or responses people have put up, that'd be great if you could let us know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to say, I know we're running tight on time here, and we do have a bit more to share. So if you do need to drop off at 1 o'clock, feel free to do so. We will be sharing the presentation and notes by tomorrow, so we can always catch you up on the content tomorrow. But hopefully you can still hang on for us or with us here. And then there have been some questions coming through. A couple of them are focused on video and when should video be used as a part of team meetings.
Yeah, excellent. So maybe just to highlight that with people working more virtually and using online meeting platforms, I have seen certainly in the media, there should be great emphasis on using video to build that connection. Whilst I think that's a good sentiment, I think be mindful of when is it appropriate to use video with your teammates, particularly if they're working in their home, and that home for many people prior to virtual work was their private space. And so I think going back to setting norms and expectations, it's something that should be agreed up front, and people should be pre-warned or forewarned if there's an expectation to use video when that's going to happen, rather than surprising them. But otherwise, video can be a powerful way of building that connection with each other. Thanks, Kat. I'll keep us moving into the third element because that's also crucial, and that's avoiding the trust trap. So when we're thinking about trust, there are a number of factors that can impact whether we have genuine trust in our teams or what I might call superficial trust. But trust becomes essential because it's the glue that's going to help your team get through frustrations and challenges that they might encounter. So to build trust requires high quality communication within a team and interpersonal trust. And that's more than I trust my colleague to do their part of the job. It's trust enough with each other to say, this is not working for me, or this is what I'm having a struggle with, knowing that you can put that out there in a psychologically safe way so that people can assist in the team. Where there isn't high quality communication, there is a real risk of not being able to trust the people we work with. And if that trust is not there, then we actually find it has a significant impact on how people's behavior within the team, be it virtual or in person. So where there's a lack of trust, you have people being more hesitant in their input. They decide what they should or shouldn't share in the team. You end up with people being unwilling to show what their real motivations or important information that might need to be shared to help the team achieve outcomes. Then that ultimately results in people holding back on knowledge that the team might need to get the work done. And at its most challenging level, you actually could have levels of trust in a team that result in people actually trying to take advantage of each other rather than working in a collegial way. So not allowing for trust or not encouraging trust has significant impact on how effectively virtual teams will work. And so the quality of the communication really needs to be emphasized in virtual teams, because virtual teams run a greater risk of having low quality communication and therefore experiencing the challenge of breakdown in tasks getting done, high turnover and disengagement. Whereas virtual teams that spend more time focusing on quality communication and authentic communication are going to foster that higher level of trust. So think about trust as you experience it in your virtual team as we speak. And again, think about how well do you think your team's going with the trust that you experience with your teammates. How does it need improvement, or is there any things that you're doing to try and build that now and it's in progress? And again, Kat, if anything has come up in the sharing from the group, that'd be great if you could let us know.
A couple people have said this area needs improvement. There's a comment as well about lack of trust with leaders.
Yeah, okay, and again, I think I highlighted the relevance and importance of leaders in terms of influencing how trust is manifested in a team. If you're leading a team now virtually as a leader, this is the time to actually role model trust building with them. So being as open as you can about what your concerns are, what you see as the opportunities, but also encouraging when you see or hear other members of your team being open and trusting with each other, and to reinforce that with them. We do know that where leaders fail to demonstrate or build trust in their teams, teams ultimately don't succeed, and in many cases people are more willing to leave a leader than remain in that environment. So I'm hoping from what we've walked away, what we've presented here, you'll be able to walk away with thinking about your current experiences of working virtually in a team as it relates to those three areas of norms and expectations, maintaining connection, and building trust in your teams. And really the final considerations and takeaways I'm hoping everyone's managed to pick up today. Take some time to assess the current communication and the quality of the communication in your team this week. Particularly if you're a leader or a manager, really spend some time listening to your team, but also asking them, how is it working for them or not? Gauge your employees' needs for developing skills around communication, particularly in a virtual context. What are the things they might need additional training and support in to work virtually? Aligning developmental resources that promote those skills. Some of them are online developmental resources, but you may also need to consider bringing in outside help with people who are skilled and have experience in helping teams address communication challenges. And also try and serve the role as facilitator with your team, facilitating high quality communication. Role model it, but also recognize it and point it out when you see it happening in your team. So on that note, I'll pause here to hand back to Kat to maybe share some final next steps from our session today.
Great. Thank you, Martin. And thank you all again for joining the webinar today. We will be taking questions in a few moments. I know we are running short on time and some great questions have already come through. So we'll probably just do a couple, but please go ahead and enter your questions in the questions box on your GoToWebinar dashboard, and we'll see what we can get to in just a couple minutes. So I'm just going to share a couple things about our company, as well as some new resources that we have available for virtual teams through our website. So for those of you that are new to the Myers-Briggs company, we work with our clients in a few different ways. We offer consulting services where one of our experienced trainers, like Martin, can design and deliver a customized solution depending on your business requirements and desired outcomes. Or if you want to build that capability internally, we do offer certification programs that will provide you the knowledge and tools to design and deliver your own solutions. We are most well known for the Myers-Briggs type indicator. However, we do have tools to support the entire talent lifecycle, including emotional intelligence tools, leadership 360s, and talent selection tools. And finally, we can offer a flexible collaborative partnership if you would like to become accredited in our tools, but also engage our experts for more customized support. For more information about our assessments and services, our website's a great place to start. And I would like to call special attention to our new web pages focused on developing your virtual workforce. From our homepage, you can click on the first banner, which looks like the one that you see on your screen here, to navigate to the virtual workforce pages. And those include information on virtual team building workshops, as well as complementary resources like tip sheets and quick guides, and infographics for download. In fact, I have put one of those resources, an infographic, in the handout section of your GoToWebinar dashboard if you want to access it now. It's available there, or again, you can just get it from our website. And finally, we do have more complimentary webinars available to attend. Our next free webinar will be on April 15th. And the topic is how personality influences virtual teamwork. That one will also be facilitated by Dr. Martin Bolt. So again, as I mentioned earlier, we will be sending the slides and the recording to each of you by tomorrow. And in the next hour, you should receive an email that links to a brief online survey that should just take a couple minutes. We'd really love your feedback about the session today. So now, again, I know we're a bit over time, but I'll focus on a couple questions here that have come through. So one that came through, Martin, was that it seems like there's a lot of information coming through providing tips for communicating virtually. Where do you start and how do you know what works?
Yes, and I think I've had the same experience just even in the last week about, it seems like everyone who's got an idea or some strategies or tips has put it out there into the online world and social media. So the first thing is I would start with what is the source and evidence behind the tips or strategies that are being shared or provided. So the ones we've shared today come from the psychological research that we have looked into that support virtual communication, but also our experience then of applying those techniques with client organizations or teams that we help build those skills with. So I think being clear about citing the source, if there are assessments as part of it, to be sure that the assessments, if they're personality based or communication based, actually have research supporting their use for that application. And I think also, just because it sounds like it's a good idea is not necessarily the only filter or criteria for evaluating whether you should use that tip or strategy. So again, I really encourage people to go back to the source. Where is the person who's offering the tip or strategy getting it from, and what's some evidence that it actually can be used? So hopefully that helps.
Great. Thanks, Martin. Another one is, how can we make sure that team members stay connected with each other on a more personal level? And this was referencing the humanizing, or the human element of the virtual workforce.
Yeah, I think so sometimes it's for teams, I guess, who have been working more in person and now we're working virtually, it might be reconnecting around topics that you might have otherwise shared or exchanged in the hallway at work or in the staff cafeteria, and just bringing those back into the virtual conversations. For teams who are newer working with each other, it's actually spending some dedicated time, as I mentioned earlier, at the beginning of your meetings, and indeed even your one-on-ones that you might have with each other, to just say, before we get down to the work, how's it going for you? What's your experience? What's working? What's not working? And not to try and have to come up with solutions or responses to it, but to just listen and hear from each other what those shared experiences are. So I think it's dedicating the time. And online, there can be a pressure to say we've got a 1 hour meeting and we can only talk about work. There's a real risk that it dehumanizes the whole experience if that whole hour is spent just on work-based conversation. So that's the simplest way of doing it. Other ways might be actually inviting people to share images or pictures, be they real photos or just impressions of what their day or their week has been like at the start of the meeting, just to get the conversation going.
Thanks, Martin. I do want to note, we do offer free consultations with our expert trainers. So if you want to talk more specifically about what your business challenges are, there's a team of us here to support you. We can help set up a call with Martin or one of our other expert trainers to talk about your situation in particular. And I do know that we didn't get to everybody's questions. There was a lot of great questions that came through, but we will make sure to follow up with you one-on-one to ensure your questions are answered. And yeah, just thanks again, everyone, for joining us today and staying on a little bit extra time. Thank you so much. And thanks, Martin.
Thanks, Kat.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.